And you did mention Jannik Sinner and the case. Obviously, we
The
reported on this
case that
last
won't go
week.
away.
It won't go away. There's been updates. It's still in the
The
news.
case we're
No,
always going to be talking about.
What do you mean, Venus Williams in the wild card? No?
it'll be like Jannik Sinner doping weekly
Yeah.
going forwards. But
That's,
no,
that's
I
what the
mean,
comments say, Kim.
Novak Djokovic is obviously was back on the tour last week. He was asked about it, and he came out and said that there's definitely favoritism going on. It's not fair with the treatment of Sinner versus the treatment of the likes of Halep, Tara Moore, etc. What did you make of his comments, first of all? I mean, do you agree with Djokovic? I think, based on our discussion last week, I think he's definitely got a fair point. But did you, pick up anything interesting on what his take was from this?
Yeah, I think it was interesting to hear that he spoke about the locker room and the kind of the general consensus is of favoritism and it not being kind of a level playing field, and as you said, kind of talking about those lower ranked players not having the support or the rub of the green that maybe a top ranked player would get. So it's interesting to hear, I think, because we don't have access to that kind of point of view, and it's interesting to hear the majority of players maybe think that from who Djokovic has spoken to, and I guess from his own point of view in the PTPA, it just shows arguably that there is a role there for for some thing or some element to kind of stand up for. I want to say stand up for the little guys, stand up for the people who might not have the resources and teams and money available to them. It might be an opportunity where the PTPA could actually do some good in tennis in terms of leveling out the playing field, because at the moment I think the situation has shown just how big that gap and that disparity is, and we've spoken about that in lots of different terms, like prize money, for example, but certainly as a kind of a support structure maybe for those players lower ranked down could be something that the PTPA maybe could and should explore in the future to kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah, and Wada, basically, there's been more stuff in the news in this week, and Wada, who originally were pushing for a ban on Sinner for 2 years, they've obviously accepted this 3-month deal with the helpful influence of Sinner's lawyers. But Wada's statement, actually, they said that they announced that Sinner didn't mean to cheat. There's no intention there. It was a sort of contamination. The amount of this substance is absolutely so minute. They've said it's a million miles away from doping, yet he has to serve a doping ban, which seems at complete odds. If they sort of cleared him of intentional cheating or doping, why should a player still have to then serve a doping ban? How do you make sense of this as a member of the public? It's so confusing to a lot of people. And I think that's why there's been so many articles about it, because it's like just trying to get your head around all the different authorities. But I mean, yeah, that phrase that they've come out with, a million miles from doping, yet he's got to serve a doping ban. How is that understandable?
Also, how is that helpful, I would say, as well? And I think when it comes to these cases, there's so many different aspects of it that can confuse, that it actually is probably a case that the different institutions that Novak Djokovic criticised, and the fact that the ITIA and WADA and the Court of Arbitration for Sport quite often are at odds with each other. And I think that now, because of the fact that there was this situation where they did actually rule something different, they have got a settlement where the ITIA did clear Sinner. I think it is a little bit of a damage control sort of PR move that we're seeing for both the head of the ITIA as well as some key figures at WADA, because a million miles away from doping, I'm not being funny, but that's actually not a scientific finding by any means. They do refer to the fact that they did look at some research. They did have scientific advice that basically said that it was almost impossible for it to be a case of intentional doping or microdosing. But I think that's probably to distract from the actual problem here, which is actually the system. By saying that Sinner didn't do this, it's trying to say that he didn't do anything wrong. They were right to settle, but at the same time, it's almost exposing them for the fact that they have still banned him. And this wasn't the case with many of the other examples or some of the examples that Djokovic has mentioned. So I think this was a strange piece and very difficult to make sense of, because then a lot of people are saying then there shouldn't be a ban. as you've said, Kim, I mean, that would be the logical conclusion. If you're about clean sport and someone's done nothing wrong, then why would you ban them? And although some of their rules are changing, it doesn't actually change the fact that under their rules, it should have been longer than what they settled for. And whether the intention was there or not, it doesn't change the length of the ban from what they initially appealed with. So saying you were going to appeal and then saying, you know what, actually, we changed our mind. We actually think
it's a million miles away.
It's a million miles away. It was so far away that we actually appealed it because we thought it was literally doping. Yeah. So that's where I think it doesn't make sense. And when you look at some of the other things, saying it's blind to the calendar, you could never control when this would be. I mean, Joel, what do you make on that? Because, I mean, are we all eye rolling to that?
I mean, it just is too coincidental.
Backdating for Rome.
I would actually go the complete opposite and say it's tailor made to the calendar. The other thing I'd add as well, just on that timing front, like the if it was a million miles away, then how was it taken so long to arrive at a decision? But yeah, I just think this is a damage limitation exercise potentially, just to kind of cover Wada's backs, in the sort of ongoing fallout from the case, which I can understand that point of view, but it feels a bit ham-fisted the way they've kind of maybe gone about it with these kind of quotes coming out, because it is going to just confuse and muddy the waters more. But maybe there's an argument to say maybe that's what they're trying to do in terms of trying to just make it just one of these situations where there feels like there's no right answer, there's no bad guy, there's no kind of villain piece or whatever. It's just a mess, and that's actually the best outcome for someone like Wada, who was so heavily involved.
Yeah, and actually Djokovic sums it up pretty well. I think he says it's not a good image for our sport, that's for sure. And I think really what Wada are doing now, saying it's a million miles away from doping when they were the people that appealed it and wanted a ban, and then all of the information that they've put out now, I think it doesn't make anybody look good. And I think it definitely doesn't give the players, as he says in the locker room, much confidence. The fact that someone could get banned for doing something a million miles away from doping. And we're not going to go into whether the different aspects of what we think when it comes to that. But ultimately, the issues that we're talking about should be about the institutions with this, and what has gone wrong, and the favoritism side of things. But one final thing I'll say on this is that WADA do have a checkered history. And when it comes to a comment that we see regularly, we get this a lot around the 23 Chinese swimmers, the fact that they did return positive tests. The Chinese doping authorities said there was no problem. You might remember this. It's quite a famous story at the time. And then WADA didn't appeal it. And then kind of recently an internal memo has leaked basically saying that they thought they did a good job to sway public opinion in their favour, having not appealed it. So there is no rhyme or reason, I don't think, in the way that they are approaching this that makes them look good, because, when people do think someone could be intentionally doping, they don't appeal it. And then when, for example, they think they're not intentionally doping, they do appeal it, and then they end up banning somebody. So this is, again, not saying that we're necessarily on the side of anyone in particular, but what we are on the side on is that this needs to clean up its act when it comes to how these cases are handled, because they're probably in a situation now where no matter what happens, or what the case is, people will not trust the institutions or the verdicts that are being given, and public opinion will really be allowed to kind of run wild. So
tennis is the loser. Tennis is ultimately the loser. And, for fans like us, it just sort of damages the brand of tennis and makes a little bit more of a mockery kind of it, that, for our friends and, people we know kind of, talk about with me.
It's the laughing stock, isn't it? The world number one can't play, but he didn't dope. And what's happening now? And, it is all chaotic. You're like, well, the world number one doped on the, not doped, sorry, was banned, has a anti-doping ban. And then Iga Swiatek, and you're thinking, wait, what's going on here? It's conspiracy theories driving wild.